You are offered 1 billion USD if you are able to sit in a room of absolute silence and darkness for 30 days. You will be fed and hydrated intravenously. The room only contains a toilet and a carpeted floor. Why or why not would you do it? Stuck in a room with no sensory feedback besides touch and smell? Hell no. Would I be physically fine after the 30 days? Probably, but I would have been driven insane by the experience, and no amount of therapy would help. Anyone who thinks they can make it through this experience and still function as a human being is deluding themselves. The you who would go into that room wouldn't be the you who came out. We as a species are very social animals, and isolation from the herd is very bad for the mental health of most anyone. There is a special kind of person who is just fine by themselves. What makes Op's original proposal so impossible is the sensory deprivation and the isolation. As already mentioned, a very specific kind of person could in theory survive just fine in isolation. But when coupled with the sensory deprivation, even the person who would be alright while isolated wouldn't be able to remain psychologically sound without visual and audio feedback. An inevitable result of the aforementioned situation is the loss of the sense of time. By day 3 or 6 your internal clock will probably be messed up, and that can also get you. Without a reliable way of determining time, time itself becomes transient. Minutes become hours, hours days, and so on and so forth. Suddenly the potential psychological anchor of 30 days becomes irrelevant, because you have no reliable means of telling time. Inevitably someone below will say, well, I could just make a scratch in the walls to determine time and I'll be good, but the counter to that is, what are you basing that scratch on? When you wake up, well, you could have slept for as little as 90 minutes, based on the different cycles of sleep, then work out until exhaustion, let's say 4 to 5 hours of near continuous exercise, being very favorable here, and then do some other activity, like meditating, for a further 1 to 3 hours, before going to bed for, let's say in this situation, 8 hours. Taking the median values of the workout and meditation, then adding them to the original sleep time and sleep time after the activities, you only come to 16 hours, even if you take the max possible times from the octavite, that's only 17.5 hours. So your new day is 16 to 17 hours. Your new day total will pass 30, and then you'll start to wonder, are they ever going to let me out? At this point, regardless of your perceived mental fortitude, the doubt will eat away at you and leave you a gibbering mess by the time the real 30 days arrive. According to my math, and it may be wrong, it takes 1.3 of these new days to total a real Earth day, so you will be in solitary for a perceived 41 days before release. What is the most unreasonable request a parent has asked of you as a classroom teacher? Please give my daughter an assignment that will allow her to pass your class and graduate. We have a busy summer planned and she will be unavailable to attend summer school. This was written in response to an email that I sent to a student's mother. For the purpose of this answer, I will call the student Bella. I had tried several times to contact Bella's mother over the school year. She had never replied to any of my emails, unlike her science teacher, whom had similar difficulties, yet communicated with her regularly. Unfortunately, it took sending Bella's mother an email explaining that her daughter was about to fail my class and not graduate, to get her to pay attention. By that time, it was already too late. Bella had attended my class 36 out of 180 days of the school year, hated history, and was usually at least 5 minutes late whenever she did show up. In class, she was disrespectful, disruptive, and never bothered to lift a finger to do any work. Once I asked her why she was absent, and she shrugged her shoulders and turned her head away from me. Her attendance in other classes was similarly poor, but not as poor as mine, which was her final class of the day. Unfortunately for Bella, I was not a pushover when it came to her grade. However, I acquiesced with her mother's wish that I give her work to take home in order to pass the class. I create workbooks for my class, which correspond to different units. This helps me not only differentiate between different abilities, but it offers flexibility for students in case they get sick, and makes it easier for substitutes to follow whenever I am absent. There are 18 units in my class during the school year, and she had yet to complete one. I decided that in order for Bella to pass, she would need to complete 1/3 of the units, which meant that she would need to do 6 of the already available workbooks. I allowed her to choose which ones she wanted to do, and sent her off with the agreement that they would be completed over the weekend, but privately, I expected her to work on them over the week. As anticipated, Bella didn't show up until the final day of class. Along with the workbooks was a handwritten note from her mother explaining that Bella didn't complete everything because she was busy and that she had tried her best. When I checked the workbooks, I found that she didn't bother to try. She had completed 2 of the easier assignments, both of which were located in only one workbook. That summer, I ended up teaching a credit recovery class for history. As suggested, Bella was in attendance. However, unlike the regular school year, most of the curriculum was online, and if you failed to log in more than 2 days in a row, you were locked out and withdrawn from the course. It took less than a week for Bella to be withdrawn from the class. To my knowledge, she never stepped foot in my school again, or recovered the history credits that she needed to graduate. I am assuming that she was failing some of her other classes, and decided to drop out as a consequence. Poor Bella. As easy as it is to blame her for what had happened, it's very clear that her mother should at the very least, receive part of the blame for enabling her behavior. What is something your neighbor did that you couldn't believe? My son and youngest daughter came running inside one day. Dustin was so angry he was in tears. He was yelling, "Mom, you have to stop her. You can't let her get away with this." I looked at him and said, "Stop yelling. And tell me what you're talking about." We had a new family that had moved into the neighborhood about a month before. They were African American. They had a son that was in my son's class. They had another son that was in my daughter Katie's class. They also had a daughter that was the same age as my youngest daughter. Dustin tearfully told me that my other neighbor, a white woman, and her daughter were telling everyone that these African American boys were molesting their sister. I was shocked. I said, "What?" He again repeated what they were saying. He said, "Mom, you have to stop them. She's calling everyone and telling them that her daughter told her this." I was furious. I told Dustin and Sid to calm down. To go back outside. That yes, I would stop them. I then walked over to my neighbors and knocked on the door. She opened it and invited me in. She said, "I was just about to call you." I told her that yeah. I figured she would be calling me, and that I was there to talk about her phone calls. I then asked her how she knew that these boys were molesting their sister. She told me that her daughter told her. I said, "You mean your daughter that you were pissed at yesterday because of her constant lies? The daughter that's been grounded for the last week and not able to play with any of the kids? To even talk to them? The daughter that doesn't get along with those boys to talk to them? You mean that daughter?" She was quiet. I looked at her and said, "You're not going to do this. I know you don't want anyone other than white people here. I know that I confuse you enough simply being Jewish. But you're not going to spread these lies. I'm not going to allow it." Her eyes squinted a bit and she said, "Just what do you think you can do to me?" I said, "Well, if you recall, when we moved into the neighborhood last year, you decided to confide in me about your husband and his visits from FBI agents. You told me all about how he and 2 others had been charged with swindling people in a real estate scam. And how your husband had to pay $2 million in restitution." I smiled. "You're going to call back every person that you've called while I'm sitting here, or I'm going to go knock on every door and tell them what I know, and I'll tell them that because you're a bigot you're trying your best to cause trouble for this family." I looked at her and said, "Who do you think they will believe?" She yelled, "I told you that in confidence." I told her that I never asked her to confide anything to me. She finally said, "What do you want me to do?" I then sat and listened as she made calls telling people that she was sorry, but that she had found that the story was not true. When she was done, I left. I went outside. My son was waiting. I winked at him and walked down to the other house. I knocked on the new family's door. Both parents were home. I asked if I could come in and talk to them for a minute. My son tried to join me. I sent him back outside. I told the parents what had been said. I will never forget the look of horror on their face. He looked at his wife and said, "Well, I guess we're moving." I told him there was no need for them to move. I told him that it had been taken care of, but that I felt they should be aware in case they heard about it later. They were confused. They asked me how it had been taken care of. I just shrugged and told them that I'd simply blackmailed the lady. They stared at me. I just laughed and told them that I didn't make a habit of blackmailing people, but that I had no problem using what information I had to stop them from pulling such a stunt. 19 years later. Our kids are still friends. I still hear from them a couple of times a year even though I no longer live in the same area.